I think you can say this is a countermove by President Biden designed to prevent Putin from gaining too much of a military advantage during this next month or two, when all of these other things begin to become more fluid and open to discussion.
And Mark Urban is here, as he is every Monday, to talk us through the big foreign policy, diplomatic and defence stories. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
How are you?
There's a lot happening. Yes, I'm very well, but slightly trying to get my head around the sheer quantity of what's happening in the next few days.
I love how you come on the show and you're just in charge of the whole world.
No
the whole world. I only have to deal with a little bit of Britain. You have the whole world. Front page of the Times today. Biden will let Ukraine fire long-range missiles. This is all about the US giving Ukraine permission to basically send its weapons into Russian territory. Well, let's talk in a moment about what this means for the US. But first, I'm interested in what Russia is going to take from this, because we've discussed before whether Russia sees itself as already being at all-out war with NATO and everything that pretends that there are red lines and so on is merely cant, or whether this actually is a sort of threshold that shifts us into a dramatically different conflict. What's your view there?
Well, look, I think I'd be foolish to say we can be confident they'll do nothing more than the efforts they're already making, which obviously very considerable military efforts to have a go at Ukraine. But also, of course, Russia is also believed by Western security services to be involved in acts of sabotage against arms factories in Germany or other parts of Europe that are thought to be supplying Ukraine with weapons. So there is already some stuff going on against NATO countries, but it's deniable. Now, do they, as a result of this, step it up a bit? Maybe more of this type of subversion, maybe even attack certain undersea internet or other links? Very hard to know. I mean, the difficult thing for Vladimir Putin in this is he's only got, a couple of months until a president much more to his liking gets in. So does he really want to ramp things up massively against NATO countries if we all know we're in an interregnum before a very different kind of president and one who's, promised to limit arms supplies to Ukraine? So it's a tricky one for him. And of course, it's a way for Biden to go out of office saying that, he has responded to the growing aggression from Russia, whether that's getting North Korean troops in, whether it's the kind of mass attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure that we saw over the weekend.
How much difference will it make for Ukraine? Literally the war effort in Ukraine. Is this game changing?
No,
right.
I don't think it is. I mean, the thing one has to remember about the Americans have given them a missile that's fired from a launcher on the ground. This is this ATACMS thing. It has a range believed to be just under 200 miles. So there are lots of targets like those things like, ammo and supply dumps and things that are kept fairly near the front on the Russian side that would be within the range of these systems. It will have an impact. Then you've got the Storm Shadow and its French equivalent, the Scalp, which are, we're not quite sure what the status is with those. But even I think if all three weapons were cleared for use up to the limit of their range, I'm not sure it would have a huge impact. There aren't huge numbers of those missiles, possibly a few dozen, maybe just under 100, something like that, Scalp and Storm Shadow. I don't know the figures for ATACMS, but the numbers aren't huge. And there's an awful lot of potential targets once you start talking about those ranges. And don't forget also, and we've spoken about this before, the Ukrainians have been very successfully using long-range drones at distances far greater than these Western weapons can reach. What they can add is very good accuracy, very fast flying, so very hard to shoot down, and a real punch when they get there for something like a bunker or something like that, which is much harder for the Ukrainians to destroy with these long-range drones, of which they've fired hundreds in the last month or two.
From Joe Biden's perspective then, why do you think he's doing this? Is he doing it to bind the hands of Donald Trump to the extent he can? Is he doing it just as a sort of big dash for impact before he's gone, to show that he's not a lame duck, or is he or does he really think he can make a difference?
Well, what I see, and once again, we've spoken about this before, about how suddenly all sorts of discussions would start happening after the American presidential election, is a kind of quickening on the issue of Ukraine. All sorts of things are happening politically, diplomatically, militarily, which speak to the different sides or the different coalitions squaring up and trying to condition the terms on which any discussion about how to stop this will be done. Now, that's why the Russians are going all out to cause as much damage as they can.
They're attacking the energy infrastructure.
Misery in sub-zero temperatures this winter for Ukrainians, to make them heartily fed up with the war, they think. Obviously, Ukrainians are pretty defiant about that kind of thing. But also, adding in more troops like the North Koreans, more weapons, all the rest of it. From the Western side, I think you can say this is a countermove by President Biden designed to prevent Putin from gaining too much of a military advantage during this next month or two, when all of these other things begin to become more fluid and open to discussion.
Because basically there are negotiations due once Trump is there, and Joe Biden would rather Russia was in a relatively weaker position rather than a relatively stronger position.
Yeah, the stronger and more defiant Putin is feeling, the less likely he is to accept the kind of deal that might be acceptable to Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, it's really tricky. I mean, clearly both of them, President Trump says, oh yeah, we'll solve it in 24 hours. But clearly both of these leaders could say no. I mean, clearly Russia can keep going if it feels it has the advantage. That's self-evident at the moment. But Zelensky could as well. I mean, much harder without American weapons. But, there are some possible ways he can try and get more out of the Europeans, produce more in Ukraine, and try and keep the conflict going so he doesn't have the appearance of someone who's desperate to stop the thing.
Has there been any response as yet to all this by Team Trump?
Not that I've seen. What, the release of the weapons? Yeah, not that I've seen. And to be honest, I think one thing we do know about Team Trump, some of the advisors around him, is that they do understand this business, that you can't seem too desperate. If one thing Trump is supposed to understand, it's the art of the deal. And he doesn't want to seem too desperate. And therefore, in a way, Biden's done him a solid in the sense that he could just keep going with this authorization, or indeed deliver more American weapons capable of deep strike if he felt that further pressure on Putin was necessary and he didn't want to appear too much of a pushover in that sense.
What's your understanding of where the Trump team and Trump himself, and of course Elon Musk being an important part of this now as well, where they are on this war? Because they talk a lot of the time about the desperate need to end it. There seem to be some sort of pro-Russian sympathies there, but then Musk has in fact been very supportive to the Ukrainians in terms of hardware, albeit while bad-mouthing them from the other side of his face. It's very hard to see where they actually are here.
Yes, I mean, there are one or two people in the lineup, like Tulsi Gabbard, who's been proposed as Director of National Intelligence, who have form as just being openly pro-Russian, and in her case, anti-Ukrainian, anti-the Syrian resistance going back a few years, really adopting, what people call Moscow talking points. But she's rather unusual in that respect. I think if you look at the nominees for Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Defense Secretary, they're a bit more mainstream. They're not pro-Russian in that sense. They clearly want to bring it to an end. And I think one can say, it's pretty obvious, and has been for some time, that Ukraine does not have the ability to take back the territories that Russia has captured. I mean, really, this has been apparent for the best part of 18 months, certainly a year. And that poses a question for everyone, really. I mean, the Germans know it, the French know it, everybody knows this, and they've really just been waiting for this American election before the nettle is grasped, and serious conversations happen about, okay, look, we know they can't take it back. We know that Putin is determined to push his advantage. What possible ways are there to try and make sure that Ukraine doesn't have to capitulate? And that's, when we spoke a few weeks back about the so-called victory plan that Zelensky was offering, it's lots of ways to try and make this a bit more politically palatable, but also ensure the future security of Ukraine.
Let's leapfrog Europe now and go to China, because Keir Starmer is going to meet President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit in Brazil, which I believe is not in China, but you're the expert. It's the first time a British PM has met a Chinese leader in person in more than 6 years. He says, Starmer says Britain needs to open a new pragmatic and serious relationship with Beijing. I mean, where to even start with this? Diplomatic talks with Beijing, what do they look like? What do we hope to get out of that? Is it all about trade?
I think a lot of it is about trade. Yeah, I mean, look, we define the Russians as a hostile power, and generally we define in the UK government circles the Chinese as a rival or competitor power, and we say they're against the rules-based order and this kind of stuff. So, in other words, the kind of mood music is never easy when a British Prime Minister goes in to talk to Xi Jinping or one of his predecessors. Yes, I think a lot of it is about trade, investment, services, all those things that we hope to do, with a post-Brexit economy. But I think there are other issues there, on the security side. And of course, there's quite a lot of information now, quite credible information, that China has been providing not just sort of chips and assemblies and things for Russian weapons to be used in Ukraine, but now actual drones and other things that are actual weapons as opposed to components. And then, of course, the deal they've engaged in with North Korea, none of which the British government likes. But clearly, this is not an equal relationship in power terms. So Starmer will have to play it carefully. He can't bang the table and expect Xi Jinping to comply with what the UK wants. I think the best he can hope for is to try and clear some of the misunderstandings, rebuild the relationship. And always, the democratic calendar and elections and all the rest of it, they always provide a moment where if the other side is interested in a reset, you can do it without having to say, why are you abandoning previous positions on X, Y, or Z, as long as you don't cut away at the fundamentals. So that's his chance, I think, is to just try and get things on a better tone. But heavens, if one remembers the pressure the British government was under Trump 1.0 to clamp down on Huawei and Chinese technology.
And indeed did.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he can try and get things on a better keel. But from January the 21st, once President Trump is inaugurated, good luck.
What will China be wanting from us? What have we got? I mean, because they already sell far more to us than we sell to them. They're not particularly worried about us geopolitically, unless they're thinking that they are in fact going to start building all our sort of 5G infrastructure and nuclear power plants, which would be a hell of a role reversal. What do they care?
I think they do care about access to the British market.
Right.
If Trump is about to start a big old trade war, these figures that have been pushed about, like 60% tariffs on Chinese goods going into the US, the UK will then find itself in this very tricky position, with some EU tariff hikes as well against Chinese products like electric vehicles. So, where does the UK fit in all this? Very turbulent, and of course will be under pressure from the US also to take measures against China. I think that's essentially what the agenda is for Starmer, is trying to carve out an independent position in which we don't get trampled too much by the big beasts as they struggle over the terms of trade.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, back to Europe. There's a big meeting in Poland tomorrow of France, Germany and Poland. What's that about? What's going on?
Yes, and indeed, I was just checking before we went on air, various other countries. So this is the so-called Weimar format. That's the foreign ministers of Poland, France and Germany, as you said. But several other foreign ministers are going to be there, including the Ukrainian one. And when I spoke at the beginning about a sort of quickening and everything suddenly looking much more fluid, that's where we are diplomatically in Europe on the question of Ukraine as well. And I think the main aim of the Polish hosts here and their foreign minister, Radek Sikorski, he has been a tough and very outspoken supporter of Ukraine. There's a lot of despair in European circles about the fact that the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, broke ranks and telephoned Putin last week. Zelensky himself has said this is exactly what Putin's been wanting for the past 2 years, to split Europe and get something that appears to be meaningful diplomacy going, while in fact he just carries on fighting full tilt. Well, I think some kind of meaningful diplomacy is now on the threshold. And the clear imperative, if you're Radek Sikorski hosting that meeting tomorrow, is to try and get a greater degree of unity between Germany, France, which is also pretty lukewarm about carrying on the war, and the other people going. And of course, it's vital for Ukraine's voice to be there in the room, and it will be. And I think some of that will also look at some of these practical things about, okay, let's say Trump does cut off all the weapons from January or from whenever, what chance is there of Europe coming up with other pipelines and being able to fund other supplies, not necessarily just made in Europe? They've been buying ammunition all over the world in the past 2.5 years to support Ukraine in order to try and make sure that Zelensky doesn't end up effectively disarmed.
And finally, Mark, what's the significance of us not being in that room? I don't mean you and me, obviously, although if you were, it'd be great. I mean, David Lamy, why is he not there?
Well, that's an interesting one. People used to say the same about what was called the Minsk format, which was what brought the holding deal on the Ukrainian war in 2014, 2015. And they used to say, why isn't Britain part of this? The Normandy group, that one was called. It's a fascinating question. I think it just speaks to the extent to which we are out on the fringe. Is it about Brexit? Possibly, yes. But as I say, we weren't in the Normandy group in 2014 either. I think it's essentially Central Europe doing its thing and the biggest powers in the EU trying to get a common line on this.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark Urban. Always an education. You can hear Mark this time every Monday, and you can read him in the Sunday Times every week.